So now we're going to bring our renders into Photoshop and put them together and make a few changes to them to prepare them for layout in Illustrator. So we'll wind up with something like this, and I'll just show on the side view, and you can replicate this for the front view. Now, if there are any parts of these renders you want to get rid of, like in the front view, the ears of the chimpanzee are slightly deformed because it was from a cadaver. You may have to clean those up a little bit. You'll have to take a look and make some decisions on your own about what to do with them, but using the tools that I'll show you here. So let's start this from scratch. I'll just close these ones. So I'll navigate to where these are. They're on my desktop, I think. Yep. So I can just select them both and drag them onto Photoshop here. Now, if you don't know, Photoshop is this icon down at the bottom here, CS6. We can drag these just into the interface and they should open. Now you look up here, they open in tabs by default. I find it easier to work with them if you tear them off, but first let's create a new file and change the preset to US paper, letter size, with a greater height than a width, so it's in portrait mode. RGB color is fine. Background color white is fine. Say OK. So we just get a white sheet of paper. And we want to just separate these out. So if you just grab the tab and drag it down, grab this tab, just drag it down, grab this one and just drag it down. Now you won't see all of them anymore, but if I command tilde, the one right above tab, then you can see all the windows. The other way to see that is if you go into the window menu, it shows you all the things that we have open here. So I also have this one open that I did earlier. But there's lateral skin, lateral skull, and here's our blank one. So let me just save this one quickly. Save as. And I'll do lateral view, I'll say comp for composition. We want to save this one as a Photoshop document so we can preserve the layers. So that's just this empty one right now. So we want to bring these two in, but first we've got to correct the exposure on this one just like we did in an earlier assignment. So with the lateral skull selected, we can go to Image, Adjustments, Exposure. And remember, we just have to gamma correct it by 2.2. That's good. So now we want to just drag this image into this file. So we can use our little selection tool here. It's the arrow with the crossed arrows beside it. But if I just click in the skull file and drag it over here, you can see it brings the background with it, and we don't want that. So we have to open up a palette called the Channels palette. I already have it open here, so if I just drag it up here, you can see what this is. So I just clicked into this file. So it shows us the RGB, the red, green, and blue values that make up this image. Now, it's an RGB image, but it's all just in grayscale right now, so they're just the same. But then there's this other channel, so it looks like layers, but this is these are color channels, how we separate out the colors. But then there's another channel called the alpha channel, and what that does is separate out the part of the file that is opaque and the part that's transparent. So it allows you to take the skull, in this case, away from the gray background, which actually isn't part of the render. So if you want to do that, you have to command click the alpha channel. So hold down command, then left click in the alpha channel palette, or in the channel palette on the alpha channel image here. And you can see there are little crawling lines around here. And now that same selection tool will have a pair of scissors on it. And if I click and drag, you can see it removes it from the background. I'm just going to undo that because we also want to click and drag and then hold down shift. Then release the mouse button, then you can release shift. The reason we want to do that is so we can make sure this skin part gets lined up perfectly with it. So if the skin one open, do the same thing, command click in the alpha channel. Still using the selection arrow here, just drag it over, hold down shift, release, and it will sit right on the right spot. Now of course the skin should be underneath the skull layer, so in the layers palette, which you should have open, see here, you can just drag the layers around. So now it's sitting in the proper order. Okay, so we've got to do a few corrections to this. First of all, let's scale this. This time we're going to go smaller. We're going to scale it to half its actual size. Now we want to be able to change the scale of both of these layers at the same time. So if we select them both in the layers palette by selecting one, then holding down shift and selecting another, then clicking on this little link icon here, we can link them together, and what we do to one will be done to the other. So just selecting here the one on top, actually I'm going to name this quickly. Okay, so now either one selected, we're going to first create our guidelines by dragging them out of the ruler on the side. If you don't see the rulers, Command R will open those up for you. So we can just drag those out. And we want to make a 1/2 centimeter guide here. So I'll put this one on, well, I'll put it near the cube down here. So put that one on 16, put this one on 16.5. So if you look at the little indicator beside my manipulator, I'm here at 16.51, so that's pretty close. I can get in a little closer. If I use the navigator, I can get in a bit closer and maybe fix these a bit. So that's right at 16 now. It's snapping right now, so sometimes it's hard to make precise little movements. If you get sort of a snapping action, you can go to View, and oh, snap is already turned off here, so I might just have to zoom in a little closer. There, 1650. So that's exactly 1/2 centimeter. So now I just want to scale this down to go into that, and then we'll be working at 50%. So if we select the skull, Command T goes into transform mode, grab one of the corners here, and we want to make sure we don't do this by accident, so we have to hold shift. Then release the mouse button just to move it into place. So I'm just checking it against the guides. And we can still use the navigator here. Just move in just to see how close we are. That's pretty good. Maybe it's a touch small. And hit return when we're done. If you want to clear the guides, you can hit Command semicolon. Then just drag these sort of in the middle here. Okay, so good. Now we've got these lined up together. We've fixed their scale together. So now we're just going to fix up the images a little bit. Let's look at the skull first. So I'm just hiding the skull, the skin layer. We still have these vertebral bones here, so we want to get rid of those. But instead of just erasing them, so in Photoshop you can use an eraser and we could just go in and erase them. What we're going to do instead is create a mask for them, just so we can go back and fix them if we want to. We're not actually deleting the pixels, we're just masking them out. So with the skull selected, this button down here in the bottom of the layers palette says add layer mask. Just click on that. And now when you paint in black and white, you have to make sure that this part of the layer is selected, not this part. You see the white box around here, but this one, just the blank white page. Here in the toolbar, if we switch this to black in the foreground and then get a brush, now this is a tiny little brush, You can see it looks like it's erasing it, but in fact it's not. If you look over here in the layers palette, it's just making a black mask that hides the part we don't want to see. So if we want a bigger brush, we can just hit the square brackets left and right to make it bigger and smaller. Now you can see that this brush has a soft edge. It's kind of fading toward the rest of the skull. We don't want to erase the skull by accident. So when they have the brush selected, you'll see this icon up here in the top menu bar. You can just click on the brush you have selected and you can change its size here. That's the same as using the square brackets. And you can change the hardness, so how soft the edge is here. So I'll make it a little bit harder so I can erase so the soft edge doesn't go onto the skull. Now in this case I probably just use a hard brush that turns it all the way up to 100. Even make it smaller as I get in closer here and I want to mask out that stuff. Now if I make a mistake and go like that, obviously I can undo, but you can also change it to white. So now you're painting a white mask, which just reveals what you covered over with a black mask before. So you can do something like that. I think I have to go a little farther. A shortcut for going between the foreground and background color is X on the keyboard. So I'm just using the mouse. Normally I'd use a Wacom tablet for something like this, but a mouse works fine here. I'm just going to save this file before I go any farther. So that's pretty good. I don't need this anymore. I could hide this, but I'm going to have to put a scale in here later on. I don't really need it though, because I can bring it into Illustrator. We're going to lay it out on a page size where we'll know the absolute scale. So we'll just have to remember that this has been reduced to 50%. So we're going to have to make a scale bar that's 0.5 centimeter, but label it as being 1 centimeter, because our final image will be half size. So I'm just going to paint out black over this too. So now I'll hide the skull layer. You can bring up the skin layer. I'll do the same thing. Go back to the skin layer, click on layer mask, and make sure we're painting in the mask. I can paint out this thing because I've got black selected and a brush. You turn on the skull. I just want to sort of feather the edge here. So just soften the transition from black to white here, and maybe fix the teeth in here too. So to do that, I'll get a bigger brush. So right square bracket. And I don't want such a hard brush, so I can go over here, make it soft, and then I can go in and try to just soften this edge. I think I would need a bigger brush, so I want a more gradual vignetting here. Now here's the benefit of using the layer mask, is here I feel like I've probably gone in too far. But I can change it to white by hitting X on my keyboard. Maybe make the brush a little bit smaller. And just go in and get that stuff back. Now if I zoom in here, you can see that I'm getting a little bit of the edge here. So I'm trying to avoid that because that will look like anatomy, but it's not. So smaller brush, change the color back to black. And so with a smaller brush, we'll get less of a fall off. I'll fix this a little bit. It'd be nice if we had a little bit more of the skin that we could have fade off more gradually into the rest of the soft tissue representation, but we can do something like that, and that's pretty good. So now if we use the navigator to go in here, and I'm working on the skin layer, so even though it looks like I'll be painting over the skull, I'm not. The skin layer is underneath. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to mask out these teeth a little bit. I'm going to harden up my brush. make it a bit smaller, just tidy this up a little bit. So that's better. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to save this again. And now we don't need all of this paper around here. So I'm just going to use my crop tool and just crop around here just to capture this part here. So I can also still adjust this, and the crop tool will only finish when I hit return. So there you go. Now we've got these two things together. Now one thing I might want to do too is to put a slight white halo around the skull to separate it out from the black background. One way we can do this is to select the skull layer, again not the mask layer this time, but the actual skull image in the skull layer. And down here at the bottom of the layers palette there's this FX, and we can choose outer glow. And this makes a glow around the transparency or the opaque part of this layer. So I can change the color here to white, change the blend mode to normal. Screen would work too if you forgot to change it. And then we can change the size so you can see what's happening here. Now we don't want too much. And the spread is, if we have a low spread and a high size, you can see it kind of feathers out. If we have a high spread, it pushes it out without feathering it. So we want something actually pretty low spread and a pretty low size, just to get a faint halo here to separate out the structure. So something like that. And this is still built in here, so you can always just double click on outer glow and go back in here to change it. Now the opacity is at 75. We want to go up to 1, we could. That's a little bit bright. Could try 80. And save that. And there's our lateral image that we can then take later into Illustrator to add labels to. So you can repeat this for the front view. It works in just the same way. And also for the other specimen, you'll have to do the same thing. And once all those are done, we can bring them into Illustrator and start labeling and laying out.